Okay, welcome everyone. This is our LinkedIn Live. I'm going to do a little intro. I'm going to intro a topic, and then we'll get into our discussion. So today's LinkedIn Live topic, creating buy-sell agreements that actually work. We're going to get into both some philosophy, some strategies, kind of talk about experiences we've had and kind of situations that we've seen around this. Pretty critical, or can be quite critical in certain situations. And I think the more that you understand and the more that you kind of do up front to get ahead of these things makes a lot of this stuff easier. We're going to talk about that. My name is Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm a strategic leadership coach. I work with companies on scaling and exiting their businesses faster, hopefully with a little less drama. I've got two guests today. First up, Colby McKenzie. Colby is managing partner at Transition Point Law. He specializes in M&A transactions, business law, corporate strategy. He is an exited founder himself, an experienced attorney, and he brings a unique perspective to crafting these agreements that don't only work on paper, but really hold up in real world scenarios. So Colby, welcome to the program.
Pleasure to be here.
Next up, we've got John Rodriguez. John is managing broker and advisor at the Ventura Group of Texas. He helps business owners successfully navigate complexities of selling their businesses, and he has decades of experience working with companies on these exits. He understands the critical role of buy-sell agreements, how they play in business, and in our prep calls, he's shared lots of stories. So I'm excited to talk about that. But John, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So just a little kind of housekeeping here. We're on LinkedIn. We're also on YouTube. For those folks that are on LinkedIn, we'll be watching the comments. If you have comments, suggestions, things that you want us to talk about or answer during this conversation, throw them in there. We'll try to work those in. If you're on YouTube, jump over to LinkedIn. We're not going to be watching the YouTube comments. So come over to LinkedIn and put them there. And also, if you're watching the replay on LinkedIn, we will be watching comments for the next couple of weeks. So if something comes up, you want to throw it in comments, we'll try to get back to you in a couple, within a day or two on it. But throw them in there. We'll try to catch comments there. And obviously, all of our LinkedIn information is on the LinkedIn page. So you can get a hold of us individually if you want to follow up on anything. So with all that, let's get into the conversation. I guess maybe I'll start with just kind of a general question for each of you. Like, why are these buy-sell agreements important? Like, from your point of view, like what comes up, or why is it critical that people getting into business with each other, and engaging or starting companies? Why is it important? And John, I'll start with you, and then I'll go Colby. Like, what's your big takeaway on why this conversation is important?
I think it's important because I think that too many founders wait until the relationship, between partners gets bad, and they think that they're going to sort all those things out if they come up, or they hope they're not going to come up. And what I've seen with working with, businesses is when you don't have the right agreements in place, not just technically, but also sort of philosophically, all of the things that have to get settled when there is a partnership break just get exponentially harder to do. And they generally take the relationships with them. They take a lot of the business equity with them, and it's just really bad outcomes. The earlier that these can be solved, the better.
Yeah. Colby, what's your high level thoughts on this?
I think it's just math. Like, if you look at the stats on business breakups, on joint venture failures, on just partner breaking up, like across the board, it's 50+% in almost every scenario. And so if you're stepping into something with a greater than 50% chance that it ends in some form or fashion, you probably should be thinking about the end from the beginning.
Yeah. I'm kind of similar. I kind of say all relationships are going to end, right? You better have a good idea of how you're going to handle it before you get started. And I find actually having a good, honest, real discussion about how you're going to deal with those situations actually helps figure out how you're going to manage the company. And it actually helps drive clarity around ownership and management and those
things. I think it feels like a prenup, or it feels like you're having this awkward conversation from the beginning. Most of the time that I've been a participant in, it's not awkward at all. It's just smart business people trying to think through different scenarios rather than this like, hey, we're breaking up before we even begin. And it's like, I haven't really seen that. So I think people's fear of it being awkward from the beginning is actually probably misplaced. And in almost every case, if it's savvy people, they get it.
Yeah. I would say the couple of cases where I have run into it, where it's awkward, it probably means there's things we need to talk about otherwise, right? It's because we haven't really had a meeting of the minds on some aspect of the business, which we really need before we go too far. And so it actually brings that stuff to the surface quickly.
I guess I would just like to add that if you're thinking about going into business with someone and you're having a really difficult time sitting down and talking about this, that is a big red flag that you guys might not be aligned. It might be, a partnership that's not really a good fit. That to me spells trouble from day one.
Yeah. And maybe we should preface this. We're not here to give legal advice and all those kind of things, but I think we're trying to. My goal for this one is get people to understand what the factors are, how the things you need to think about or consider when dealing with this idea of a buy-sell agreement, so that you kind of know what advice you need to get, what avenues you need to go down. But let's talk a little bit about kind of the purpose of a buy-sell and where it kind of plays out. And maybe Colby, I'll start with you. Like, as you kind of think about why we even have buy-sell agreements and what kind of scenarios or situations we're trying to capture here, and then which ones are kind of the easy ones and which ones are the more complicated ones.
Yeah, I think when you think about it holistically, it's like, have you thought through what happens if you no longer want to be in business together? Mm-hmm. That's where most people's mind go, hey, we're trying to preemptively think, if we don't want to be in business together in the future, how is that going to be handled? And that can be bad actors, somebody not carrying their weight, just the partnership has run its course and people no longer want to be partners. It can be something where there's a deadlock and you can't agree on a decision, or you can take it in another vein and it's, hey, we were partners and then there was a divorce and now somebody that I didn't think was going to be my partner is now part of the cap table, or somebody's passed away and now it's part of what's being passed on to children or spouses. And all of a sudden you have partners that you didn't sign up to be partners with. And so it doesn't necessarily have to come voluntarily. Sometimes it comes in the form of involuntary manners.
Yeah. John, in terms of your sense, like when you kind of think about buy-sell agreements and like what they're supposed to cover, what comes up for you?
Well, I think there's sort of two buckets. There's the unexpected thing that happens, whether it's disability, death, divorce. There's all of those which tend to be sort of they tend to be kind of binary options. It's like, if this thing happens, then there's this next thing that happens. I think what Colby was talking about more with sort of the deadlock and just the breakdown of the actual effectiveness of the partnership. I think those are a lot more complicated. And I think they're a lot harder to solve for. The buy-sell language that needs to be there for like death, disability. I mean, that's pretty simple. It's this is what's going to happen. Here's how it's going to be funded. Those I think are pretty easy to solve for. The ones that I think are a lot harder, what if you do have a bad actor? How do you define that? What are the options if there's one person that just wants to leave? How do you solve for the mechanics of that, for the valuation? I mean, that to me, that's the one that's a lot more complicated.
Yeah, I agree. I'd kind of bucket them into the like mechanical. It's like, we've got some kind of triggering event, whether it's disability or incapacitation or something, or, the whole kind of divorce and assets getting passed on, like the only thing I will say there is make sure you update your insurance policies. Like I've had it come up several times where, originally it's like, we'll put $1 million in there. And then you've got a $50 million company and all of a sudden this buy, it's just like, so there needs to be a little grooming or like maintaining and updating of those things. But yeah, I think this whole kind of when you're either at deadlock or non-performance or, things are just shifting and the partnership, either it doesn't make sense to continue the partnership or the partnership needs to change significantly and you've got to work that stuff out. And you go to the partnership agreement, the operating agreement to figure out how to kind of make some of those decisions. That's where it gets sticky. I guess what are some sort of strategies or maybe approaches to this that you've seen and kind of some of the pros and cons? And maybe I'll start with one of these, which is I do feel sometimes there's this, the partnership agreement or the operating agreement partnership agreement is kind of this, well, if we can't figure anything else out, we're going to go there and it's going to be ugly and it's going to be painful, but it's going to be decisive. Versus kind of this, no, we kind of go to the partner and it has some kind of process, which is supposed to be fair and equal and kind of working. Because I do find that those are kind of two different strategies and depending on the nature of the business and the partners and how they want to handle it, there's kind of there's two camps that I've seen there. But I'm curious what you've each seen in terms of how partnership agreements deal with this kind of deadlock or decision making. Hey, we don't want to be in partnership anymore. We need to change the partnership significantly. What are some of the things that come up? And Colby, why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah, I probably will sell against myself as the lawyer here on the call. But from my experience, if there is no spite or malice involved in this breakup, the best thing that can happen is two people sit at the table, figure out how to split the baby, make it work, and get it done quickly. Because what I can tell you is that any time that this drags out, you might as well hang the for sale or we're closed sign on the door, because it trickles through to employees. It trickles through to customers. The working relationship isn't going to get better if you've already decided to split up. So speed becomes really, really important. And a lot of times the fastest way to get something done, again, assuming there's no malice or spite, is just sit down at the table, say, we're not leaving till we sort this out. Put the lawyer next to each of you and have it papered at the end and just sort it out. Because I think that's the fastest path. But then that's not always the case, right? Sometimes people are angry. Sometimes people don't want to sit down and do something amicable. And that's when you say, okay, well, if we don't have something already pre-baked, then we're stuck. That's when you need the contracts. That's when you need to have pre-thought through this and be able to say, okay, now we're going to go through proper mechanics and this is how it's going to play out because we thought about it ahead of time. But again, I think the fastest path is to not get to there to even begin with.
Yeah. John, what's your take?
Yeah, I think like Kobe said, using any kind of legal mechanism is really the option of last resort. Yeah. I think what I tell a lot of the owners I work with, and advice I wish I would have taken myself in my own businesses, is like Kobe said, you're in a small business, you are not going to hide this stuff from your customers, from your employees. Yeah. If there's a significant misalignment,
even if you're trying to hide it, like good luck, right? Go through it anyway.
Employees are like kids. It's like they pick up on what
dad
are doing.
Absolutely.
It's going to affect the business. So I tell everybody, don't the minute you have some inkling of there being some kind of partnership problem or misalignment, address it, get to it early, because as these things fester, they never get easier to solve.
Yeah. I do a lot of partnership coaching, and one of the things we do is a quarterly review just on the partnership status, right? And we try to catch this stuff, and sometimes it's, just like life situations change a little bit. Someone wants to be a little less aggressive with the business, wants a little more time for themselves, right? The other partner wants to just like crush it. And so, but if we catch that early and we can kind of, okay, well, let's put some different, maybe disproportionate compensation stuff around it, or we'll kind of incent certain things. Well, it's easier to deal with when it's small and just kind of just starting to show up than, 3 years later, and one partner's, built up all this resentment and they feel like they're being mistreated. And now people have got the knives out and it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, time never makes the solutions easier.
Yeah. And we were talking about this before we went live.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that you have to be thinking about at the beginning is like, are you 50-50? Is there a majority minority, and which side of that are you on? Because those dynamics matter. Like you said, if you're sitting down having these conversations and you're 50-50 partners, those conversations go one way. If you're majority minority, they go a different way. I think it's important to understand the dynamic at the beginning and really assess, okay, if I'm the majority holder, like what am I willing to not have control of? If I'm the minority person, like how am I getting out of this in a situation where it's a private company and I don't like what's going on? Like there's the what you're contemplating is so different in each of those three buckets that I think that kind of prefaces the entirety of the conversation, at least from one individual to the next.
Yeah. What are your really rights and obligations under the under the agreement? Let's talk about that briefly. 50-50, not 50-50. If you were just advising, a partnership group on some of this stuff, like what would be your suggestion on how you do control percentages and things like that?
I would flip it back and say, when, if ever, is something truly 50-50? Mm-hmm. And if the answer is no, which to me it almost always is no, then you shouldn't have a 50-50 partnership, right? Like it just very rarely is something truly down the middle 50-50 as far as what's being contributed and what's being done on a go forward.
Yeah. And I would say too, even if you have that scenario where you're starting at 50-50, what are the odds that 2 or 5 years down the line, it's still going to be perfectly symmetrical in terms of contributions? I mean, I mean, it's almost impossible. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The way I've always thought of 50-50 partnerships is I think you're just kind of postponing the hard conversations. You're waiting until there's a big enough disagreement that now we have to address, who's the one that gets to control the decision making, or how you're going to solve for there being a lack of agreement.
Yeah.
I agree with Kobe. I think the 50-50 partnerships are really, really hard.
What do you do in so if you're dealing with 3 partners and they're equal 33% each, right? Like on one hand, that's
even
nice.
harder, probably.
Well, so I was gonna say, on one hand, it's nice because you can okay, you just 2 people win, but the problem is now you're dealing with just a political nightmare. It's like, you get decision makers and people are kind of jockeying for getting that controlling percentage and stuff. I mean, it becomes more complicated just kind of you add partners.
Totally.
The other one I'm curious about is how this changes over time. And this isn't so much buy sell, but it's really just kind of ownership percentage. I've been with a couple of groups have used this kind of point system where, like, as things change and people add different kind of contributions and things like that, we do kind of adjustments to the percentage change, so that there is this kind of somewhat mechanical process of being able to recognize, hey, look, the business is going this way, this person's contribution is greater, or this person is selling more, or this person is providing more value, or this person is not. Like, I've been in several situations where 3 people start a company and then one decides to go off and do something else, and now, like, what do we do with this absentee owner kind of things? Like, how are there any good ways that you've seen to kind of adjust things as the situation changes and people's contributions and value kind of shifts as the partnership evolves? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I deal with smaller businesses usually, and I tell all the owners I work with that we've really got to get very clear separation between earned income and shareholder income. I mean, I think that can help solve for a lot of that. That if you do have partners that are making like contributions, and then you have one partner that wants to play golf more or wants to look at opportunity or something like that, revisiting the earned income can help sort out some of that disparity.
Yeah.
I also think it's just a very good practice in business that there be really clear lines between here's what I'm coming to work to earn and here's what I'm being paid as a shareholder, because they're really different responsibilities.
Yes.
And I'll even take it one step further, and I think this is probably contrarian and unpopular, but companies, from what I've seen, that run the smoothest are those that have a controlling shareholder or controlling member, but not necessarily that controlling member making the most money in any given year. And the way you can do that is synthetic equity. You can do it through revenue sharing, profit sharing, all of these contractual rights that are not equity, but contractual rights, so that if I go out and crush it in a year for the business, I'm going to make a ton of money, and the person that's the controlling owner may not make a lot of money, but they've done something in the beginning to get it to a situation where they deserve to have that controlling stake. So if you ever sell the company, maybe they make the most in that scenario, but in a year over year, given what's happening in any given time, I don't know that necessarily means that they need to make the most money a year. And I think that solves so many problems where it's like, you don't need to be fighting over all of this in a corporate governance perspective. You need to fight over it in a partner perspective, as like, what's your commission this year? What's your profit this year? Stuff that's like more economic that you can sort and solve without it completely derailing or train wrecking your business. I think, at least from my experience, like companies that are structured that way typically have a better chance of making it for a long period of time than those that are like, hey, we're 50-50 partners and we're making all of these decisions hand in hand. Like, good luck.
Yeah. The other one, I've seen some partnerships actually use debt that way too, interestingly. And then that, because typically what happens is like, oh, well, the company doesn't have enough cash to pay people, so we're going to issue equity. Like, we're going to make it an equity thing. And I've seen some partnerships actually turn it into a debt. Like, rather than putting it on the cap table, you just make it a note against the company, so that that person's owed something, but it's just a debt payment. Now it's prioritized, right? Like, they're the first one to get paid, and they're usually a decent interest rate, market rate interest. But it's a nice way of kind of dealing with cash in a way that doesn't automatically kind of turn into equity and ownership that then becomes a nightmare, right? In terms of, well, it screws up all of the percentages and the decision-making rights and stuff like that. So that's another one that I've looked at more and more as we've kind of dealt with some of these situations. I want to switch topics briefly, or kind of get back to the operating or the buy-sell agreement. And I think probably one of the stickiest ones, which is valuation, because I think, it's always this, oh, okay. So, we start the company and there's going to be some buy-sell that says, all right, well, if one of us, decides to leave, or we're in doing some kind of recapturing equity from a partner, they get paid out. There's always this at some valuation. In the beginning, it might be $1 million, $2 million, and we can kind of think about it in certain ways. But then all of a sudden we're at a 20 million, 30 million, $50 million company. And who has cash, right? Like actually funding the buyouts, or either agreeing or coming up with some reasonable way of calculating value is problematic. And then actually funding these buyouts become problematic. What have you kind of seen in terms of how agreements have kind of approached this issue of valuation and financing buyouts? What are some of the typical strategies you've seen deployed? And John, why don't we start with you?
The typical strategy is no funding at all. I mean, that's unfortunately that's the one that I see the most is, you have two partners that, finally come together in an agreement. They finally agree on the mechanics, the timing, the valuation, and then there's just no way to pay for it.
Yeah.
It's a problem you see in a lot of small businesses. They don't have ready access to capital a lot of the times. Cash flows, oftentimes aren't sufficient to actually finance a buyout. And I think that at the front end of any of these discussions or any buy-sell agreements, I think you really have to start with where is the money going to come from? For this, are we going to be able to find, third-party financing? Are the individual partners going to be able to actually pay for this? Is there going to be future cash flows that can pay for this? Because all the agreements and all the alignment in the world doesn't matter if nobody can actually pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I'll give you an example where this actually comes into play, and it's a situation that maybe on its face it seems like it's a good solve, but it just goes right back to whoever has deeper pockets wins these type of things. Almost always, it's just sadly, unless you're doing a seller note with a really long tail and you're just going to pay for it with income of the company, whoever has deep pockets is probably going to win in these types of scenarios. But one of the common tools for deadlocks or breakups is what's called Russian roulette provision. I've seen it called a push shove. It has other names, but most commonly Russian roulette, which basically says, I'm going to put a number out there, and this is the number that either I'm buying you at or you're buying me out at. Yep. And so you're putting the number on the table, and you're giving the person that you're putting on the table the option to say, this is the number you're getting bought out at, or you can turn it on me and buy me out at. The concept in theory is supposed to be quick, and it's supposed to cause people to utilize fair valuation because it can go both ways, right? I'm putting it out there, but if I try and lowball it, they're just going to try and buy me out of that. And so in theory, it's fast and it creates fairness. But in reality, I can put a number out that's low if I know you can't pay for it, right? So if you don't have the money to begin with, I already know that. I'm going to put a low number out. You're going to be like, well, I can't pay for this. And it's like, well, today I just bought you at a discount because I can pay for it. So even when you're thinking about these provisions that are prevalent, that are common, that are popular for obvious reasons, there's still downside if you're the one that doesn't have the deep pockets. And I think you have to think about that at the jump and try and assess, hey, am I the one that's going to get taken advantage of here? And if so, you're lobbying for the 10-year note that's paid off with income, right? But that's all negotiated stuff.
Yeah, I have a pretty good story about that not working because I did this in my businesses with my sister. We had our attorney actually called it a Texas buy-sell agreement.
Oh yeah,
we were in Missouri at the time. That's where I'm from. But we had that kind of language, and it was, hey, if I put this offer out, you have 30 days to accept it or to turn it on me. And I went and did that, and she just said no. And I went to my attorney. I said, well, what do we do now? And he goes, well, you can sue her.
Yeah, exactly.
Sue her. So, we had this thing that, again, on paper sounds great, but again, nobody's obligated to do any of it. That's the problem with a lot of these agreements is, if the parties don't all fully understand exactly how these things work, and if they don't, have a kind of good faith intention of honoring them, then again, you're going right back to coming up with a legal solution. And the reality is that a lot of these things, like Kobe said, sound really good, and sound like really good solutions, in reality, they're just not that effective.
Yeah.
So-
Well, yeah, I'll advocate more for doing quarterly partnership planning. So you never get into this issue.
But it also goes to show you need unilateral action in some of this.
Yeah.
So anytime that it requires both parties to participate, you can have somebody that's just like, I'm not doing it. But if it allows for unilateral action, like I put the offer out there, 30 days passed, you haven't accepted it. I now can make the purchase. Here's what happens. And it's all unilateral. It allows you to avoid those no action is actually action in and of itself. But you mentioned the Texas one, and there is a term called a Texas shootout, which is similar, but it actually is like way more dramatic. And you both put your piece of paper out, and it has your offer on it. And whoever has the higher of the two is the purchaser. So it's basically the Russian roulette, but it's like significantly more dramatic in that you both slide your piece of paper out, or theoretical piece of paper. It's like whoever has the higher number is the buyer. So there's a lot of ways to do it.
Sounds way more fun.
Yeah, I'm gonna build an app that handles this for companies that are in a Texas shootout.
Shootout provision, baby.
Another thing I want to get at, because I've seen this come up more than once, which is you go through this, you do the buy sell, right? That you have the transaction, and then everything starts to default, right? Like because a lot of the issue is, okay, so I have an agreement, I have some kind of way of doing the transaction, I've got some kind of payments, structure, but then the problem is, typically it's collateralized against the company, or you're paying this out with earnings. Company's not performing, and now they're back into the situation, right? Yeah. The purchasing partner, defaults on whatever payment, and typically those are set up as you default while you get your ownership back, or maybe you get the entire company back or something. Like, how do you deal with how do you kind of securitize some of these things, or what strategies for how to deal with that? Okay, great, we have this process for resolving this thing, but does it really stick, or does it really resolve it long term? What have you seen here? Because I've had it come up a couple of times in these cases. Colby, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think that's always the downside, is if something is unilateral and then they still don't execute against it, you're right back to square one. Yeah. And also, if something is bilateral, meaning it requires both parties, then it's going to be even hairier. But I think at the end of the day, it all goes back to, if you don't want to be partners, you will find a way to not be partners. Yeah. Right. So I default, I can't pay. It's like, I still don't want you back. So let's come up with some settlement that says, okay, you can't pay today, but you'll pay me over 12 months and you're going to pay some interest, or some other arrangement that allows you to separate. Because the worst case scenario is like, whoops, financing fell through. I didn't actually buy you out. Now we're like awkwardly staring at each other in the office when we thought we were broken up yesterday. It's like, if you guys have been following,
still living together.
The Lakers trade, right? Like, they made the trade last week and then it fell through, and the guy's like back on the bench, like, whoops. That's what you don't want to have in your partnership.
Yeah, ugly. John, I don't know if you have thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I think I go back to, the sooner these things can be addressed, I think the better chance there is that they don't get to that point. Yeah. Because I've had to have conversations with a few partners where I go, look, if you guys keep arguing about this, there's going to be nothing left to argue.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of the bottom line is, one of you or both of you can get a little of what you want, or neither of you can get any of it. And that's unfortunately what happens a lot of times. But I've seen this process take years, where the partners are just, going back and forth and nipping at each other. And then, you look down and there's nothing left in the business. It's liquidation. And then you get to split that.
Yeah. Well, I take it one step farther. So not only are you going to be left with nothing, but each are going to have $100,000 legal bills.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to be in the hole pretty quickly.
And we utilize a matrix, and this may put a bow on it, but the matrix, when we're thinking through these type of provisions, is time. How long is it going to take to actually get this done? Because we've all mentioned multiple times, like, longer is not better.
Yeah.
Money, like, is your business big enough to actually pay for lawyers, pay for third-party valuation experts, like, or is it small and you need to just break up without all of those costs? Effectiveness. There's so many types of buy, sell, and derivative provisions. Like, which ones are actually effective? I always joke, the one that says, like, go to third-party mediations, like, cool, we're just going to pay money and then get nothing solved. Like, right? There's some that are like forced forced liquidation, like, oh, that's a really fun option. Like we just dissolve, like some of them have terrible effectiveness. Some of them we've talked about, like if you have unilateral rights, can be pretty good. And then the last one is like, what's the consideration? And I think we've all hit on this one too. Is it going to be a note? Is it going to be something just coming out of pocket? Is it going to be an insurance policy that's been out there for key man? Like all of these different options you have to think through each of those 4 buckets and kind of find where you sit on the continuum. Otherwise, you're going to put something in place, think you have it. 5 years later, it's going to come back and punch you in the face.
Yeah. We're going to hit time here, and I know we've kind of painted this picture of lots of horrible things, but I think my takeaway is this stuff the sooner you address it, earlier you address it, the better off, and then keep having these conversations. The best way to avoid all this stuff is communicate effectively in the partnership and catch this stuff early. It's just so much easier to deal with it early rather than years of resentment, and now you're at deadlock, and now the world's kind of falling apart. So
I'm definitely stealing. I really like the idea of having those quarterly partner meetings specific to this. Like that's a really fantastic idea. Yeah. I'm stealing it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So I just want to make sure that if people want to get a hold of both of you, the best way to get that, John, if people want to get information from you, what's the best way to contact you?
Go to venturatexas.com, or you can look me up on LinkedIn.
Perfect. I'll make sure that's in the show notes here. And Colby?
Yes. Email is going to be c.mckinsey@transitionpointlaw, or if that was too long and you didn't get it written down fast enough, just DM me on LinkedIn and I'll happily reply.
Perfect. And you can always reach me at bruce@eckfeldt.com, and eckfeldt.com is my website, and then obviously LinkedIn as well. So John, Colby, thank you so much for taking the time today. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah. Great talking with you guys.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.